This webinar is brought to you by Certara, where we accelerate medicines using proprietary biosimulation software technology and services to transform traditional drug discovery and development. Our clients include more than 2,300 biopharmaceutical companies, academic institutions, and regulatory agencies across more than 70 countries. As Robin mentioned, we're going to be talking about plain language summaries today, and our speaker is Dr. Lee Holland. Lee is a colleague of mine at Certara, where she is the Associate Director of Regulatory Services Management, Plain Language Summaries at Certara. She has more than a decade of research and medical writing experience and has overseen the authoring of more than 200 plain language documents. Lee earned her Master's of Public Health and PharmD from the East Tennessee State University. Welcome to this event. I'll now turn it over to Lee to begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne, for that great introduction. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen. So today we're going to be talking about plain language summaries, but not just about the summaries themselves, but the why behind them, the why behind the regulations and guidance. So our agenda for today, first, we're just going to discuss what are plain language summaries. We're going to do a really high-level overview of EU regulations concerning plain language summaries. And then we're going to talk about plain language summaries as health literacy educational tools. So diving into our first topic, what are plain language summaries? I'm going to start off with a poll just to kind of see how familiar is everybody with plain language summaries. Okay, can I give it a little more time for our results? Okay, I can see that a lot of our audience is not very familiar. Some are somewhat familiar. So we're going to go ahead and hopefully help everybody understand plain language summaries a little bit better. So first, what are plain language summaries? Very simply, they are summaries of a clinical trial, results that are written up at about a 6th to 8th grade reading level. They often include infographics. Here's an example from one. As you can see, we have to tackle some pretty complex topics in plain language summaries. And this one, we're talking about how sound travels from the ear to the brainstem. And you can see that we use infographics that really often helps with the general public being able to understand some of these really kind of complex topics that we're having to discuss in these clinical trial summaries. So next, we're going to do just a really high-level view of EU PLS regulations. At the end of the slide deck, I do have some resources where you can go to if you want more information about this particular topic. So when did these regulations go into effect? The CTIS went live on January 31st of 2023. As a result, the EU PLS regulations went into effect on that date. So taking a look at the regulations for plain language summaries, they clearly state that within 1 year from the end of a clinical trial, that the sponsor needs to submit to the database, which is CTIS, a summary of the results of the clinical trial. So that 1 year deadline. So from the time the trial ends, you have 1 year to go ahead and put that plain language summary out onto the database. Now, for clinical trials that have pediatric participants, that deadline is only 6 months. There's a really big emphasis on getting the information about clinical trial results out to both the participants and the public. So there's a really big push for transparency here. The regulations go on to state that the sponsor should submit a summary of the results that is understandable to a layperson, and that's very important. So you can't write up a quick summary of the clinical trial results and have it be at college level. We have to be sure that the results are written in a way that people can actually understand them if they want to go out and they want to take a look at these. Now, the exact information that plain language summaries must contain are in Annex 5 of the legislation. which is titled Content of the Summary of the Results of Clinical Trials for Laypersons. Now, I'm just going to quickly touch on the 10 different requirements. First, they have to include, clinical trial identification. This is usually the EU clinical trial number. Information about the sponsor who's doing the trial. General information about the clinical trial. This is typically study design, that sort of thing. Population. So who are the people that are taking part in this clinical study? Also, you have to state what drugs or products are being tested. And also a description of adverse reactions and their frequency. So I'm going to stop here for just a minute because I feel like there's sometimes a little confusion about this. When we're talking about the safety results in a plain language summary, what we are reporting are the related adverse events, or the adverse events that the clinical trial doctors believe are related to the study drug. A lot of times people think that we need to report treatment emergent adverse events. That's not the case. We need to be reporting those adverse reactions. Next, we have to be sure that we're reporting the overall results of the clinical trial and comments on the outcome. Now, here it's very important to understand that these documents cannot be promotional. So you have to be very careful as you're writing up the results and communicating comments on the outcome that these are not promotional in any way. Also have to let the general public know if there's going to be any follow-up studies with this particular study drug, and also additional information where you can find additional information about the clinical trial. So that's just a really quick overview of what these documents must contain. I am going to say now that currently neither the FDA of the United States or Health Canada has any requirements for plain language summaries. The European Union, the UK, and Turkey have plain language requirements, but the EU was the first to make this a requirement. So that's why we're just kind of did a real high level overview of what the regulations are. Now we're going to start talking about health literacy and plain language summaries. Now, October is Health Literacy Month, which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this presentation. And from here, we're going to see a pretty distinct tonal shift in the rest of the presentation. And you're going to see why here in a few minutes. But first, I have another poll question for everybody. How familiar are you with health literacy principles? We're going to give it a few more seconds here for responses. Okay, I can see that most of our audience are not very familiar with health literacy principles. Some are somewhat familiar. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at health literacy principles. And there's actually two main types of health literacy that we need to discuss. First is organizational health literacy. That's us. That's us in our professional life. We are part of organizations that are dealing with healthcare or health information or clinical research in some way. Organizational health literacy is the degree to which organizations equitably enable individuals to find information about healthcare, and that helps them inform their health-related decisions. So basically, organizational health literacy is how well organizations provide information to the general public to be able to make informed decisions about their healthcare. Now, personal health literacy, that's the degree to which individuals have the ability to find, understand, and most importantly, use information and services to inform health-related decisions, both for themselves and for others, perhaps family members, including their children, or maybe elderly parents that might not be able to make healthcare decisions for themselves. So why am I talking so much about health literacy? Why is this so important? There's been a lot of research that has linked health literacy to health outcomes. I'm going to give just a couple of examples. There's a systematic review and meta-analysis of cardiovascular patients that showed that low health literacy was linked to significantly higher mortality and also an increased rate for hospital readmission. So they've been in the hospital due to a cardiovascular event. They're released from the hospital. If they have low health literacy, they're more likely to end up back in the hospital again, on top of being more likely to die. Also, something that's very important for us to keep in mind is that higher educational levels do not correlate to higher health literacy. Just because somebody has a college degree or a master's degree or even a PhD does not mean that they have good health literacy. There was another study of patients that had recently been released from a hospital, and they found that those that had a high education level but a low health literacy level had a higher probability of needing emergency care and needing to return to the hospital through the emergency room. Another example that's a little more relevant to us is that higher health literacy was associated with a higher willingness to enroll in clinical trials. So the higher somebody's health literacy is, the more likely they're going to want to engage in and take part in research. Now, I know a lot of times we're really focused on the regulations. What do the regulations say? What requirements do we have to meet? What do we need to do to not get an RFI or not have an audit? And I understand that, but we also need to take a look at what the purpose behind these regulations are. And the purpose behind these regulations is to provide transparency into clinical trials and also patient education. Now, most patient education materials that seek to increase health literacy often contain a call to action. An example would be if there was a local health department that was doing a smoking cessation campaign. They might provide literature about the benefits of stopping smoking, and then they might say, talk to your doctor or pharmacist to get a plan in place, or here's information about nicotine replacement therapy. They provide people with instructions on what they can do next if they're interested in this. Now, because plain language summaries come at the end of the study, we generally don't view them as containing actionable information. A lot of times it's like, okay, the clinical trial is over, we're not enrolling any participants. And so, there's not anything really actionable here. We're just getting the information out there. Now, I'm going to argue that across the industry, we need to change our attitudes about plain language summaries. I believe that plain language summaries are broadly educational, and they can help improve health literacy about emergent medical treatments that are the result of clinical research. While plain language summaries don't contain directly actionable information, what they do contain is important information to give people context to inform their healthcare decisions. These healthcare decisions don't just concern whether or not you want to enroll in a clinical trial, but also community acceptance of new medical advances. Because quite frankly, we can produce the best medical treatments in the world, but they mean nothing if they're not accepted by patients. You could have a cure for cancer, but if the patients of the general public don't trust you and they're not willing to accept that treatment, it's not doing anybody any good. One great thing is that by improving health literacy, it can impact entire communities. I love this infographic. It's something that was produced for Health Literacy Month, and it says, start a ripple of health literacy. So basically, when you start improving health literacy, that health literacy ripples outwards as people share information. So I touched earlier a little bit on public acceptance of clinical trial results and the new medications and treatments that are developed as a result, and public acceptance. And this is a theme that we're going to touch on for the rest of the presentation. Now, due to the global health crisis that was the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a huge need for health literacy resources, including plain language summaries on those newly developed vaccines and treatments that were the results of clinical trials. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at one community and how health literacy around clinical trials and new and emerging treatments changed people's lives. The community we're going to look at is Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chattanooga is where I'm from. That's where I am right now, as a matter of fact. A little bit of information on Chattanooga. It's the fourth largest metropolitan area in Tennessee. It's part of Southern Appalachia. And actually, Chattanooga is one of the largest urban areas in the Appalachian region. It has a population of approximately 185,000 people. Now, take a closer look at who is living in this area. The poverty rate in Chattanooga is estimated to be almost 21%. That's about 10% higher than the national average. High school graduation rate is about 87.5%, which is below the US average of about 90%. And also, only 30% of the population has a bachelor's degree or higher level of education, compared to almost 38% nationally. So that's kind of a snapshot of Chattanooga. Now, low health literacy is a result of lower educational attainment and lower socioeconomic levels. It's currently estimated that 80 million adults in the United States have low health literacy. So this is not something that is unique to Chattanooga. However, Chattanooga's education and poverty demographics makes it especially vulnerable, to negative health outcomes. So I'm going to talk about a Facebook group, the Chattanooga COVID-19 Community Assistance Group. It was established in the early week of the pandemic. It was created by a group of community activists and volunteers to provide accurate information to the people in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area. I was a part of it. I was the medical and public health moderator. Also included people that had formerly worked with the state of Tennessee and could help with things like unemployment assistance, and also just helping people with food hygiene and financial support. As an example, in the early days of the pandemic, it was literally, hey, Jessica down in Fort Oglethorpe has IBS. She's down to her last roll of toilet paper. Can anybody help her out? But over time, we became a key hub of health literacy education on the pandemic. It's important to note that at one point in time, the Chattanooga, Tennessee region was one of the top hotspots for COVID-19 in the world. So as a result, I kind of unexpectedly found myself fighting misinformation as best I could to try to save as many lives as possible in my community. And we're going to take a look at some of the things that the volunteers in the Facebook group were involved with. Now, I'm going to start off by saying the stakes are high. People die when accessible information about clinical trial results are not available. I'm going to repeat that again. People die when accessible information about clinical trial results are not available. We need to do more than just post plain language documents to a website. If we really want to get really important clinical information out about the results of clinical trials and the treatments that are being created and get the public to accept them, we need to partner with other groups and organizations. And we also need tailored messages for each community or for different communities. The reason for that is there are some communities, especially here in the US, that have legitimate concerns about medical research that have not been addressed. The example that I'm going to give is the so-called Tuskegee experiment. Now, Tuskegee, Alabama is less than 250 miles away from Chattanooga. It was the location of one of the most horrific medical abuses in the United States in the past century. What the Tuskegee experiment was, a very long-term study of syphilis. What happened was researchers, and I really don't even want to give them that title, went to rural communities in Alabama and went into the Black community and told Black men that they would be treating them for what was at the time called bad blood. Bad blood was a commonly used term for syphilis during that era. They did not let the men know that they had syphilis. They didn't provide them any information about what syphilis was or how it was spread. And then later on, when a treatment for syphilis was found, penicillin, they did not provide these men treatment. If you know anything about syphilis, untreated syphilis is a terrifying and horrific disease as it progresses. Now, before you dismiss this and you think, oh, that happened a long time ago, that shouldn't really be impacting anything now, the so-called Tuskegee experiment was still ongoing during my lifetime. It did not end until I was a young child. So when I say that there are communities that have legitimate concerns about medical research that haven't been addressed, I'm completely serious. This is just one example. Now, I did mention engaging with other groups. The Chattanooga COVID-19 Community Assistance page partnered with a nonprofit, Get Vaccinated Chattanooga, that was doing vaccine outreach in the community. And also ClinSearch, that was the local CRO site that were enrolling people for the Moderna and the Novavax clinical trials. So I'm going to talk about effective health literacy education and reaching out to the community. This is a Facebook post about a Get Vaccinated Chattanooga event. They vaccinated 126 people in a single day. They partnered with the Second Missionary Baptist Church, which was founded in 1866, immediately after the Civil War ended. It was the Second Baptist Church in Chattanooga that was founded by the African American community. Now, one thing that the Facebook group helped with was getting this information out into the community. Get Vaccinated Chattanooga, they wouldn't even have 126 views on most of their posts. But by partnering with us and letting us amplify that message, we were able to get word out to the community to help them have a successful vaccination event that day. In addition, we were constantly providing information about the vaccines, answering questions about the vaccines. So it was really kind of a partnership between the Facebook group, Get Vaccinated Chattanooga, and the Second Missionary Baptist Church. Also going to talk a little bit about health literacy and clinical trials. First, as I mentioned, both Moderna and Novavax had a clinical trial site here in Chattanooga. Here's a post where I was thanking everybody who volunteered for the Moderna vaccine trial. That was a great day. That was the day the FDA advisory panel endorsed the vaccine. The next is a post from Vicki. She works at ClinSearch. And here she was letting people know that the Novavax study was about to stop enrollment here in Chattanooga because they were about to hit their enrollment cap. And I'm very proud of this because the Novavax site here in Chattanooga actually closed a little bit earlier than other sites. And I would like to think that it was partially due to us helping the community understand clinical trials and what was happening with vaccine research. The next one is one that I think is really interesting. I have to give you a little bit of information on the Novavax trial. The Novavax trial was ongoing when the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines were approved. As a result, they unblinded and did a crossover. Everybody who received placebo came back in and received the Novavax vaccine. Now, at first, the community was really confused by this. They're like, what do they mean by a crossover? Why do I have to go back in to ClinSearch and get a second shot? Was there something wrong with the first one? I spent a lot of time answering questions from the community about what a crossover trial was, what a blinding was, and why they needed to get a second injection. And here, people are saying, hey, I'm excited I have my crossover appointment. I'm getting to go back in and I'm getting the vaccine now. And this is something I'm very proud of because in Chattanooga, Tennessee, members of the public were talking about crossovers in a clinical trial and what it meant. And hopefully this, the work that we did helped with retention because people were willing to go ahead and go back a second time to ClinSearch and get that second injection. Here's also something about health literacy and non-clinical research. but it still definitely has relevance to us and just getting people to enroll in clinical trials in general. East Tennessee State University, where I graduated from, was doing a pilot program to collect some information for future NIH-funded research. They were doing a survey on the pandemic and public health measures and how people felt about them. There were over 20 researchers disseminating the survey, trying to get results in. One of them reached out to me and said, "Hey, Lee, we know the work that you're doing in Chattanooga. Would you mind sharing this on your social media channels and to that Facebook group that you're part of?" And I said, "Sure." Promoted it in a single post. However, when I clicked on the link and I took a look at what I was going to be sharing with my community here, I realized that the informed consent form was going to scare people very badly. It was not easy to understand. As a result, I just wrote up just a paragraph long explanation of what the research was about, what the informed consent form at the beginning really meant. And as a result, 33% of all completed surveys were a result of the single post that I made. Now, one thing that I really want to stress is I believe that we need to move towards ICFs, informed consent forms, that are written in more plain language that are easier to understand, because it's really important to communicate with people what's going on in research, whether it's a clinical trial or just a survey, so they understand what's going to happen to them and what's going to happen to information that's gathered about them. I'm going to give you another example. I was able to get the opportunity for my father-in-law, Skip, who was in his 70s, to take part in the Moderna vaccine trial. We went down to ClinSearch. He got all the paperwork, was taking a look at it, saw the ICF, and he got scared. Even with me there trying to explain everything to them, he decided that he wasn't going to do the Moderna clinical trial because that informed consent form scared him so badly. Later on, he did enroll in the Novavax trial. I don't know if it's because their informed consent process was necessarily better or if he just had the time to gather more information and feel more comfortable with it. But I think this is a really important area that we really need to focus on to help with health literacy around clinical trials, so people understand what they're about and they're comfortable taking part in them. Now I'm going to share a success story with you. The matriarch of this family lost her mother to COVID-19. Despite losing her mother to COVID, she was still concerned about the vaccine. Now, here I'm going to take a moment and say, too many times we see the world as a dichotomy, as, you know, there's anti-vaxxers on one side who are anti-science, and then there's people that are pro-science, pro-vaccine. I think one critical element that we're missing is that there are a lot of people who are confused because there is so much information and misinformation out there, especially around the pandemic, both in the early days and still to this day. A lot of people were very confused about the information that they were receiving. Part of that is because the anti-vax movement has a really, really good propaganda arm. You know, they're really good at pushing misinformation. And so as a result, what happened is Pastor Reed, who's the pastor at the Second Missionary Baptist Church, you know, he was well informed. He had been working with Get Vaccinated Chattanooga. So he was very health literate especially about vaccines and the pandemic. And so he was able to sit down and speak with this matriarch and was able to explain things to her in a way that she was comfortable with getting the vaccine, and all of her children received the vaccine as well. This is a great example of the ripples of health literacy. You know, Pastor Reed, you know, he was health literate about this topic, and he was able to share it with his family, and then the mom convinced the children. So this is one of the ripples that we're talking about. This is what we want. Next, I'm going to talk about what happens when our health literacy efforts around new treatments and new vaccines fail. And everybody, please forgive me because sometimes I get a little bit emotional when I'm talking about this topic. Let me introduce you to Altum. Back in 2001, Altum was a 26-year-old from Lakeside, Tennessee. She was married with 2 children, had graduated from Sequoia High School in 2011. We're going to talk about her experience with COVID-19. On August 15th of that year, Altum was at the zoo with family members. Now, she believed that COVID-19 was real. She didn't think it was a hoax, like a lot of people in this region. But she was still uncertain about the vaccines. All the misinformation about mRNA vaccines and changing your DNA and all the other anti-vaccine information floating around out there, left her uncertain. Then on August 31st, she posted that she had COVID-19. So on September 2nd, she's posting that she's 12 days from her positive test. She's at home, but she's on supplemental oxygen because her oxygen levels keep going down. I think it was about this time that she joined the Facebook page looking for information and help for herself and for her family. Her family and friends were recommending that she receive hydroxychloroquine, which, of course, doesn't do anything for COVID. People within the Facebook group were suggesting that she seek out monoclonal antibody treatment, but unfortunately, she was outside of that 10-day window already. So first, because of misinformation and low health literacy, she didn't receive a vaccine. And then later on, she didn't think to, and she shouldn't have had to think to ask about monoclonal antibody treatment. But maybe if she knew more about the results of research ongoing, she would have thought to ask her doctor or her medical providers, she was a good candidate. On September 5th, she was admitted to Erlanger Hospital, which is the local hospital system here. And she was still posting about her experiences with COVID and asking people for prayers. On September 12th, Altum needed a heart-lung bypass or an ECMO machine, but there wasn't one available at Erlanger. Her family took to social media and to the Facebook group looking for a facility that might have an available ECMO for her. She was a really good candidate for this treatment because she was young, otherwise healthy, didn't have any comorbidities. Unfortunately, an available ECMO couldn't be found in time, and Altum's COVID had progressed to the point where an ECMO was no longer an option for her. On September 23rd of 2021, Altum died of COVID-19 a little over a month after she was first diagnosed. And, the volunteers on the Facebook group really asked if there was anything else that we could have done where we could have reached her. She came to us looking for help, looking for information, looking to increase her health literacy. But unfortunately, by the time that she reached out to us, it was too late. And I want to really, really emphasize that none of this is Altum's fault. None of it. There was so much information and misinformation that was being thrown around, especially in the early days of the pandemic and even up to this day. And it was so difficult to get accurate information out to people in a format where they would want to read it, where they would want to consume it. So I just really want to emphasize that there were probably hundreds of thousands of Altums, maybe even millions of Altums all around the world. The next thing I'm going to touch on is that the public wants health literacy education materials. At the height of the pandemic, the Facebook group had about 14,700 followers on Facebook. That was more than the local health department and government sites. As an example, the Tennessee Health Department's followers are approximately 2.7% of the state's population. At our height, the Chattanooga COVID-19 Community Assistance page's followers were approximately 8% of the Chattanooga population. And there was a large team of moderators, and we approved every single person who joined to be sure that they actually lived in Chattanooga and we're not a bot. We're not somebody out trying to push multi-level marketing. So that's a pretty deep breach in a single area. So I'm going to say that people are needlessly suffering and dying because of low health literacy. Health literacy education about clinical trials is desperately needed because the public wants and responds to health information and education materials that they can easily understand. So I'm going to say that plain language documents can be harnessed to increase health literacy. Increased health literacy about clinical trials can save people's lives and it can prevent suffering. So my challenge to all of you is to treat each plain language document as though it will inform somebody's healthcare decision. No, plain language summaries come out after a clinical trial is over. They can't be promotional. You can't say, hey, talk to your doctor about our newly approved drug. However, they can provide important background education about clinical trials and how clinical trials are done. So it might help somebody decide whether or not they want to take part in a clinical trial. Also, it provides information to people who are thinking about taking a drug or a vaccine. Maybe they want to see the research. So treat all of these documents as if they're going to inform healthcare decisions. And I told you previously, October is Health Literacy Month, and we don't want just health literacy awareness, we want health literacy action. We want to see where plain language summaries can be used as health literacy tools to help engage and educate the public about clinical trials and about newly approved treatments that we're putting out there to hopefully improve people's lives. So here's just a few resources, links to the actual regulations, the GLSP, the Good Lay Summary Practice, and some other resources. So thank you, everyone, and just seeing if anybody has any questions.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lee, for that highly educational and really moving presentation that you shared with us. So as Lee said, we welcome our audience to provide their questions to us. And someone comments, they want to know, how does health educational attainment both not correlate with health literacy, but then in the Chattanooga examples, educational attainment does relate and possibly correlate to health literacy?
That is a great question. I think it's very much a situation where one size does not fit all. There is a link between educational attainment and health literacy. So typically we do see where there is lower educational attainment, there are lower health literacy levels. However, when we start seeing people that have higher overall education levels, their health literacy levels do tend to be a bit higher. However, there's not always direct one-to-one correlation. So it's a situation where if somebody, for instance, has their PhD in English literature or some other non-scientific or non-medical field, they might be very highly educated, but their health literacy levels may still be low. I can understand where that's kind of confusing, where on one hand, we're saying that there is a link between lower educational attainment and low health literacy, but at the same time, while people who are more educated do tend to have higher health literacy levels, that's not always for certain. And I think the main message that I was trying to convey is, don't make assumptions that just because somebody has a bachelor's degree or higher, that they're going to be health literate.
That makes a lot of sense. Someone would like to know whether the FDA or Health Canada are considering similar regulations.
That's a question that we get a lot of times. And as of right now, I don't believe there are. However, there are people that are trying to get, for instance, the FDA to allow a link on clinicaltrials.gov that would link out to plain language summaries. I think right now there's still a lot of concerns about PLS being promotional, and they're not, or at least they shouldn't be. So I think that's kind of maybe a little bit of a hang up with the FDA on plain language summaries.
Got it. So you've talked about plain language summary requirements for drugs and vaccines. Does the plain language summary requirement also apply to medical device clinical trials?
That is a good question, and that is something I'd have to check on and get back to you on.
Fantastic. Um, let's see. Someone wants to know so we said FDA and Health Canada don't require PLS. Are there any health authorities besides EMA that require plain language summaries?
Yes, the UK and also Turkey.
Fantastic. What surprised you when you were working with your community about health literacy?
I think one of the biggest things that surprised me was how much people could really understand if you took the time to explain things to them. I know I've ran into the attitude a lot of times of, oh, this is too complex. There's no way that we can explain this to the general public. But I found that if you take the time to truly engage and interact with people, you'd be surprised at how much somebody that doesn't have a science or medical background can really understand about clinical research and the results.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Someone remarks, great presentation and thank you for your public service. I agree with you about informed consent forms. Are you aware of any examples of informed consent forms that have a high health literacy level or any organizations leading efforts to improve the health literacy for informed consent forms?
Yes, thank you. That is something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that's something that I've been really trying to champion. I think the multi-regional clinical trials group is also pushing. They've done some great research into ICFs and creating more health literate ICFs. And that's something, like I said, that I'm also working on as well, just because of my personal experiences, like with my father-in-law, Skip, and just also what I've seen in the community at large.
Great. Another person says, thanks for your presentation. What do you envision would be the most effective platform to increase health literacy? It would seem that company-based organized dissemination of information could be efficient. I think they mean the sponsor here, but it could also make consumers suspicious of financial motivations.
Yes, thank you. That is an excellent question. My response is that you need a multi-pronged approach. And also you need to partner with other organizations. So for instance, you might have a sponsor that is wanting to really do a big health literacy push. They might want to partner with patient advocacy organizations or other community advocacy organizations as well, to help increase that level of trust. Because I know, for instance, the Facebook group that I was part of, we partnered with ClinSearch. We also partnered with those nerdy girls that do a great science and medicine information blog. We also partnered with Get Vaccinated Chattanooga. So you can't do it in a silo. You've got to reach out to other organizations. And the multi-pronged approach doesn't just apply to the different organizations you work with, also the different platforms that you use. So for instance, there's multiple platforms on social media that you can reach out on. There's also community events where you can partner with organizations and get the word out in a more kind of one-on-one level. There's advertising campaigns through traditional media. So I think there's, once again, it's not a one size fits all. It's going to have to put a lot of thought into it, set up the right partnerships, and take a multi-pronged approach.
Absolutely. And folks, thank you so much for all these amazing questions. I see some folks are putting them in the chat. If you can put them, please, in the Q&A box, that would help us out a lot. So, Lee, you talked a lot about the role of misinformation in the pandemic. So there's a question related to that. Someone says, I feel that the government made a lot of missteps in the early days of the pandemic that turned people off to hearing the scientific messages later on. Are there initiatives that you're aware of that address this need to improve initial messaging so that the public doesn't make a decision resulting in lack of trust that ends in them not listening to these messages later?
Oh my goodness, there's a lot to unpack in that deceptively simple but very well thought out question. As far as initiatives go, I believe the CDC is working on some. I think those missteps are exactly the reason why you saw groups like those nerdy girls and my group working at a local level in Chattanooga really kind of step up to help provide that information. Other than maybe some work that's being done by the FDA, I really don't know of anything that's going on. I think a lot of it really, during the early days of the pandemic especially, came down to just grassroots organizations. Some of us worked locally, some of us really took off and went internationally. So I think, unfortunately, those initiatives were mostly and still are in the hands of private individuals who are trying to step up.
Definitely. Got a really fantastic question on technology. We're talking a lot about generative AI and its potential. So somebody wants to know about, can you use generative AI to generate plain language summaries? If yes, what about patient confidentiality?
Okay, that's really kind of two different questions. First, can AI be used to generate PLS? It can definitely be used as a tool, because one thing you also have to keep in mind with AI is, where is it pulling information from? If it's pulling information from the internet, I'm afraid all it's going to do is generate a lot of more misinformation. And as far as patient privacy, since with plain language summaries, you're working with an aggregate return of results, there's not any patient-specific information that you really have to be concerned with, unless it's a situation where it's a very small study in a very rare disease. Then sometimes you have to worry about patient privacy and being sure that patients or participants in clinical trials are not identified. AI, I think, is something that could be a great tool, but I'm still kind of waiting to see it get its kinks worked out and seeing how it can be really fully kind of integrated into a tool to assist writers.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, we may need to ask the person asking this for more background, but someone says, referencing the diversity plan guidance, it doesn't mention plain language summaries, but doesn't the diversity plan guidance touch upon community outreach?
Yeah, the diversity plan guidance, I'm not, yeah, I'm sorry, I would need more information
Okay, fair enough.
to answer that one.
There's another question about just the concerns about bias in these summaries. So it says plain language summaries are a great way of medical communication that engages patients for trials and acceptance of treatments. How do we differentiate medical communication and bias in results for clinical trial outcomes? For example, can it be over promising the results more than the true outcome of the trials?
Well, with all the plain language summaries that I've been involved with, been very, very concerned to be sure that how the results were presented were not promotional in any way, and also really emphasizing that the PLS is presenting the results of a single clinical trial only, and that other results could be different. So in the discussion of the clinical trial results section, I like to see a lot of emphasis on explaining the limitations of clinical trials, and stating that sometimes there needs to be multiple clinical trials before we're really sure of the results. So I guess that's my answer to that one.
Thank you. Looks like we're kind of coming to the end of our questions, but these have been really fantastic. Someone wants to know if there's a plain language summary for the FDA patient-focused drug development guidance.
Not that I know of, but I can definitely try to get some additional information and see what's going on with that.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think this looks, unless we've got more questions coming in, because we do have a few more minutes, but I think looks to be the last one. Someone says, shouldn't plain language efforts begin with the informed consent form and any clinical research flyers in the US under IRB informed consent form requirements?
Okay, that is also something that I would have to check on. I'll be honest, I work mainly with European and UK regulations. But as far as should plain language be involved from the very earliest stages of a clinical trial? Yes, definitely. Definitely. And I think sometimes that with ICFs, I don't know if legal departments get hold of them or if the people putting them together, have just been in the industry for so long that they forget a little bit about what the general public understands. I definitely think that plain language should be involved from the very beginning of all clinical trials so that everybody's involved with them really understands truly what's going on and what's happening.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Lee, thank you so much. I think this is the end of our questions, but this has been fantastic. Our audience has really asked some great questions, and it's great to see such robust engagement on this really important topic. Just want to let everybody know that the next webinar we're doing with RAPS will be leveraging today's technology to accelerate submissions, real life examples, and lessons learned. This will be on November 29th. Be sure to sign up on the RAPS website. And so on behalf of Certara, I'd like to thank RAPS for hosting this event and thank everybody for their attention and questions.